Welcome to the new Hegelian Philosophy channel. Today we continue our discussion of Ivan Illich's classic book, Deschooling Society. In response to a patron's request, we now move on to consider the second essay within the book, titled The Phenomenology of School. Now, once again, the first time you hear this title, Deschooling Society, you will probably react with utter disbelief, a shock. How can you talk about deschooling society when school is so necessary? Well, if you ask someone, why is school necessary, the answer will probably come down to something like, well, that's where children have to go. In this particular essay, Ivan Illich is going to deconstruct this formula, school is where children have to go, by showing that it actually doesn't really make any sense outside of a certain kind of process of circular reasoning, in which the only way you can define school, on the one hand, is that that's where children have to go. But how do you define what children are? Well, children are people who have to go to school. We can say, in addition to that, maybe that children are, well, obviously people who are different from adults, but if we ask how are they different from adults, it really comes back down to this circular reasoning formula about school. Well, children are different from adults because whereas adults are people who have to work, children are spared from doing the kind of work that adults do, not because we want them to do nothing all the time, but rather because they have to spend so much time in the obligatory attendance of this other place called school. So once again, we find that school and children are both things which seem extremely obvious in modernity, and yet you can't really define one without the other, and this is intentional. You can only maintain the necessity that everyone has to go to school if you insist that every single person, without exception, is a child for the first 18 plus years of their life. Now that college is also obligatory, I guess your childhood really lasts until you're in your 30s. That's when you finally get to leave your school after, graduating with multiple degrees, only to be told, oh, sorry, there are no entry-level jobs for recent college graduates. But be that as it may, even citing the utilitarian benefit of getting a job skill isn't really the point. It's rather that school is where you have to go if you're a child, and you're a child if you have to go to school. Now, the expectations that we have about childhood may seem totally obvious, but they're not that old even within Western civilization. Really, it's an idea that only goes back to, let's say, the Romantic era. You have the Romantic movement in the late 18th, early 19th centuries, in which British poets like William Wordsworth kind of invent the myth of childhood as we know it. If you read his poems about childhood, he portrays it as an idealized period of time back in the distant past, in which you had innocence in contrast with the flawed human nature you have as an adult. You were able to spend all of your time in leisure as opposed to spending so much time doing hard work as an adult. In addition, you were able to experience joy so much more purely as a child, weren't you? You look back fondly at the times that the same experience, if you were to repeat it today, you wouldn't feel as much happiness as you did when you experienced it in childhood, or at least that's what your distorted memory, or maybe the myth of childhood itself, would lead you to think. Now, this is something which, at the time that Ivan Illich wrote his book, was not a universally held presupposition. It was kind of limited to the West, and was kind of unknown in other parts of the world where children actually were expected to work. They were expected to do the same work as adults, say helping their parents in the agricultural fields, or helping with the family business or other household chores, which had to be done by somebody in the era before all of that was outsourced to machines. And the parents, if you had asked them about this, wouldn't have really been able to understand the idea that the child should not work, because of course those same children weren't going to school, so there wasn't another place they were supposed to be. At the time that Ivan Illich wrote this book, a huge percentage of the people in the world, of the entire global population, never went to school. Okay, so you could see that, once again, childhood and school kind of presuppose one another. And if you want proof that this is a new idea even in the West, you should consider, as Ivan Illich brings up himself, the strange way that in pre-modern paintings, even within the West, if you look at medieval European paintings of say, babies, they basically just look like little versions of adults, certainly smaller in size, but the facial features of babies, even including like portrayals of Jesus Christ sitting on the sitting with his mother Mary, they basically looks like a man. This is because we take for granted that children are fundamentally different from adults only because the myth of childhood, and more importantly, the institution of the school, force us to think that way. It does not actually come as naturally to us as we might think. Now, this close connection between childhood and school is something which Ivan Illich at one point in this essay describes as kind of a manufacturing process. Childhood is just a product that is manufactured by the process of schooling, and would therefore cease to exist without the latter. It's precisely schooling, in other words, which turns people into the sort of children that we associate with these stereotypes about people who especially lack the age of reason. And that's the deepest point really behind all of this. For what do you learn in school except the fact that you can't make your own decisions? Isn't the main thing that you learn immediately when you start going to school as a child that you have to obey figures of authority outside your own family, not just, your parents, but your teachers, your principal? You have to obey these figures of authority because, well, you're just a child. You can't make decisions for yourself, including about whether you want to attend the school. It's obligatory. It's a crime if your parents don't send you to school, that the truancy officer will deal with in a legal manner of grave seriousness. And this is something which, once again, is the main point of you going to school in the first place, is that you learn this is a place where you have to obey without any possibility of a debate. There's an asymmetric relation between the child and these adult figures of authority, which extends far beyond the subject matter being taught. The teacher in a modern school isn't just, say, an expert on a particular subject like geometry or the Spanish language or chemistry or something like that. It's much more important for the child to see the teacher as somebody who can kind of control or make decisions for them with regard to, say, morality. You learn morals more in school, arguably, than you do within the home from your parents. The job that used to be held by the pastor or priest has largely been outsourced to the school. They're the ones who tell you what you're supposed to think about moral issues as well as decisions for your own life, etc. And this is something which basically takes on the role of a secularized version of religion, in the sense that, according to Ivan Illich, the teacher kind of serves as a priest over initiation rituals, which used to be handled by, well, literal priests within religious institutions. School is every bit as much about those initiation rituals as it is about actually learning knowledge about fields like mathematics or grammar, etc., which students learn less and less about with each passing year. But despite the failure with regard to actually learning that knowledge, the schooling ritual goes on because it's much more important to socialize every young person into this expectation that the figures of authority are basically like a secular version of the Pope. The Pope is the infallible speaker of truth who doesn't debate with the people lower within the religion about what they think might be the truth with regard to his decisions. And as laughable as that might sound to liberal secular figures within the educational apparatus, if you were to put it to them in those terms today, they hold exactly the same expectation about their own authority. They also view figures of authority within the educational system as infallible figures who tell children what they are supposed to think, rather than have a debate in which they could both participate as equals. And this is a kind of state that you're supposed to remain in for 18 years plus, despite the fact that you actually do reach the age of reason within that time. Ivan Illich compares school, therefore, to a second womb. So obviously you're in the first womb for 9 months when you're literally in utero before you were born by your mother. But then the schooling process forces you to spend another 18 plus years in another kind of womb, in which the laws of reality are temporarily suspended, in which you're put into a pseudo-religious space with its own laws, in which there are figures of authority who have the power to tell you not just what the truth is within your textbook about a specific area like history, even if those history textbooks are filled with errors, as James Lowen noted in his classic book, A Lies My Teacher Told Me. But even beyond the truth contained within a textbook about a specific subject, they're the ones who get to tell you what truth is with regard to morality, politics, your own life decisions, etc. And then when you're finally reborn upon finishing school, you feel like you have gotten a freedom for the first time in your life that you actually had for many, many years. Schooling is something which makes you not realize that you already have freedom, rationality, and ability to act, and ability to decide for yourself about morality, truth, and things of that nature. And of course, that is the whole point. The real meaning, therefore, of deschooling society is just allowing people to realize what they already have. It's not necessarily to give them anything new beyond those faculties of rationality, critical thinking, etc., that they already have. It's just showing them what the schooling process had hidden from them. And that's why I think everyone should read Deschooling Society with an open mind.